20 years ago, researcher Greg Easterbrook wrote a book titled The Progress Paradox. Maybe you've heard of it. The tagline tells the story: how life gets better while people feel worse. How life gets better while people feel worse. He looked at decades of research to show that how almost every aspect of Western life has vastly improved. We've experienced unprecedented advances in health, in wealth, in increased life expectancy, far greater material comforts, right? And yet, people don't feel any happier. Actually, the subjective feeling of happiness in the Western world has declined in some ways. It's a paradox. We have more stuff, we're healthier, wealthier, living longer and better lives, and yet, we're not more satisfied. In some ways, we feel worse than previous generations. Why? Easterbrook explains it this way: because of our increased comfort, we've shifted from material wants to meaning wants. Our focus has shifted to thoughts about our meaning and our purpose in this world. Many are troubled by questions like, what's the point of it all? How will I be remembered? How can I contribute? How can I add value to the world? And these kinds of questions are hard to answer, can be overwhelming. Add to that a sense of guilt when we compare our posh and cushy lives to those who live before us. We should feel better, right? But we don't. In fact, a lot of people feel like they're drowning in a sea of guilt, despair, anxiety, and worry. For the last several weeks, we've been studying the life of someone who had it all. In fact, there's a line in the Bible telling us Solomon was the richest and wisest person to ever live. We know that most Americans, ourselves included, we live like we're kings, don't we? Especially compared to people in other places around the world. Solomon actually was a king of a vast empire with almost so much wealth it couldn't be counted. And this is interesting because what we're looking at today is what caused him to question the meaning of life. It caused him to ask some meaning and purpose questions, to ask the same kind of questions we've been talking about. What's the point? How will I be remembered? How can I add value? And so on. And from what we'll study today, Solomon didn't feel great about his comforts and his life being comfortable. He actually was pretty negative. There's a phrase that we see 7 times in Ecclesiastes. He says, all of our pursuits are like someone trying to catch the wind. Which is a pointless endeavor, right? You can't catch the wind. You can't find the end of a rainbow. You can't catch smoke in your hand. It's pointless. And he says this over and over again. I found this and many other things to be like striving after the wind. Let's look at this together. If you have your Bible, please open to Ecclesiastes 1. It's on page 318 in the blue pew Bibles in the seats in front of you, towards the beginning of your Bible. After his introductory remarks about the fleeting nature of our lives, how our lives are like a morning mist in the grand scheme of time. You know, super encouraging stuff that you want to put on a coffee mug. Starting at the end of chapter 1 through chapter 2, he starts to elaborate on these thoughts. And he gives the reason that he thinks this way about life. He considers many aspects of life. This is what we're going to look at today: education, pleasure, enjoyment, wisdom, and finally work and toil. And he wanted to know, what's the point of it all? Why do these things matter? Why should we invest ourselves in them? And his conclusion isn't very encouraging. And I want to start with that because sometimes it's just better to rip the Band-Aid off, right? I'll start with his summary and then we'll sweep through these verses to see how he and why he came to that conclusion. Here's his conclusion. There's no point. There's no point to anything. Everything is worthless, he said. It's fleeting. Nothing is worth the energy and effort we put into it. He's basically asking, why on earth would anyone keep chasing the wind? Because we'll never catch it. He wanted to give up in despair. That's his conclusion. Let's look at all the things he considered. Starting in verse 12 of chapter 1. I, the preacher, have been king over Israel in Jerusalem. And here it is. I applied my heart to seek and to search out by wisdom all that is done under heaven. Okay, he had this pursuit he's telling us about. What's his conclusion? It's an unhappy business that God has given to the children of man to be busy with. I've seen everything that is done under the sun, and behold, all is vanity and a striving after the wind. Interesting place to start, right? Because we know that Solomon was the wisest man to ever live. He affirmed that in verse 16. And his conclusion is kind of depressing. He applied his heart to seek and search out wisdom and concluded it's an unhappy business. Why has God given this to us? In verse 17, he says it again. I applied my heart to know wisdom, and his conclusion is the same. It's like trying to catch the wind. More wisdom means more vexation. More knowledge is more sorrow. It's like, come on, Solomon. Tell us something positive, right? He's so doom and gloom. I said last week it's like Eeyore. I forgot about Snuffleupagus. Remember Snuffleupagus on Sesame Street? He moped about too. That's what it reminds us. Is this all there is? He's kind of like that friend who just can't find anything positive. Look back at verse 15. What is crooked cannot be made straight. It is what it is, right? We have to live with it. But that next line, look at this. What is lacking cannot be counted. What is he saying? You can't count what isn't there. No, duh. Like, why are you telling us this, Solomon? Just to make it worse? What a downer. His conclusion is, the more I learned, the worse it got. I only increased my sorrow. Then in chapter 2, he tries something different. He turns to something that should produce more happiness and contentment. He gave himself to pursuing pleasure and enjoyment. He wanted to make the most out of every moment. Verse 1, I said in my heart, come now, I will test you with pleasure. Enjoy yourself. He thought about laughter, pleasure, even looking to alcohol to see if it could bring enjoyment. And if anyone could pursue the pleasures of the day, right, if they were open to him, it was the king. Anything he imagined, anything he wanted, it would have been brought to him in a heartbeat. Solomon was like an A-list celebrity of our day, a world-class athlete who could buy anything and do anything. So Solomon, what do you think? Does this bring about meaning? Is this worth pursuing? No. A resounding no. But behold, this also was vanity. I said of laughter, it is mad. And of pleasure, what use is it? And he tried. He did the best to have anything he wanted. He built at least 3 houses. He planted vineyards, made gardens and parks, planted trees. He owned more herds and flocks than anyone. He amassed countless gold and silver. Anything anyone could ever want was at his fingertips. And I'm not sure, parents, this is one's free, why more parents don't send their kids to Ecclesiastes when they start complaining about what other kids get and you don't get. You could just pull this one. Look, Johnny, look at Solomon. He had everything. More than any of your friends could ever want, and it didn't satisfy him. Why do you think it'll satisfy you? Think that'll work? Wouldn't hurt trying, right? All right, jump to verse 10. Whatever my eyes desired, I did not keep from them. I kept my heart from no pleasure. For my heart found pleasure in all my toil, and this was my reward for all my toil. Then I considered all that my hands had done and the toil I had expended in doing it. And behold, all was vanity, all was fleeting, and a striving after the wind. And there was nothing to be gained under the sun. New pursuit, same conclusion. It's just like chasing the wind. Rinse and repeat for the rest of this chapter. Starting in verse 12, Solomon considered wisdom and folly. And then in verse 20, he talks about considering all the toil and work he poured his life out for. And after everything, the preacher said something we probably could see coming, but we're still surprised when we see it. Look closely at verse 20. This has to be a low point. So I turned about and gave my heart up to despair over all the toil of my labors under the sun. Whoa, right? Did you catch it? He gave in to despair. He threw his hands in the air and said, I quit. I can't do it anymore. I'm done. So we got to ask the really important question, why? Why did he give up in despair? Because, verse 21, sometimes a person who has toiled with wisdom and knowledge and skill must leave everything to be enjoyed by someone who did not toil for it. And this is serious. He says this also is vanity and a great evil. It seems that now he's beyond despair. Now he's angry about it, right? He calls it a great evil. Now, do you know what he's talking about? In order to answer that, we need to go back to verse 13. Scroll back up to verse 13. The preacher compared wisdom and folly and determined one is better than the other, but then everything falls apart. Let me read this. Think about what he's talking about in verse 13. Then I saw that there is more gain in wisdom than in folly. Okay, so at least wisdom is better than folly, Solomon, as there is more gain in light than in darkness. The wise person has his eyes in his head, but the fool walks in darkness. And yet, here it is, I perceived that the same event happens to all of them. What's he talking about? Do you know? What happens to everyone, to the wise and fools and everyone in between? It's death. He's talking about death. That's his answer. That's what troubled him so much. Verse 15, then I said in my heart, what happens to the fool will happen to me also. Why then have I been so very wise? I've been wasting my life in this. And I said in my heart that this also is vanity. He laments that no one will remember him after his death, and it doesn't matter. The wise dies just like the fool, and the earth just keeps going on and on, right? That's what we talked about in chapter 1. This seems to be the clincher for him when it comes to his possessions and all that he worked and toiled for. Look closely at verse 18. I hated all my toil. Why? Because I'm going to leave it to someone else. And there's little chance those who come after me will value it as much as me, even less chance they'll use it wisely. Now, if this really is Solomon, this is exactly what happened. His son lost almost 90% of Solomon's possessions. What a waste, right? He squandered it. Now, in his son's defense, God was against him, remember? God promised to tear the kingdom from Solomon, but only after his death. But at this point, I want to step back and take a wider view of what Ecclesiastes can teach us. The preacher is lamenting something. He's lamenting the fact that no matter what you do, no matter how smart you are, no matter how hard you work, no matter what pleasures or enjoyments you pursue, even if you give your entire life to these pursuits, in the end, every person will die. And we ultimately don't have control over that. This is why he throws his hands up in the air. He has this sense that no matter what he does, it doesn't matter. This is why he despairs. When I was younger, I had a kid sister. And maybe this isn't surprising, but I wasn't the greatest brother. Oh, maybe you are surprised. I remember one day I hatched a great plan. Our family had enjoyed the card game Uno. Remember that game? So I had this idea to play Uno against my sister. And I had the whole deck to prepare before we played. You can almost guess what I did, right? I looked through the whole deck. I pulled out all the best cards, every one of them, all the wilds, all the draw fours, all the reverses, everything you want to have in your hand. And I meticulously put them back in the deck. One for you, one really good one for me. One for you, one good one for me, right? Another wild for me. You get the idea. So what did I do? I stacked the deck. Hey, you want to play Uno, Krista? I'll deal. What transpired was the greatest game of Uno I've ever played. I had the time of my life. I think I even worked out the first few moves, so knowing which color to play and which she wouldn't have, so she just kept drawing and drawing and drawing, and I just kept laughing and laughing and laughing, and she had a mitt full of hands before she quit and accused me of cheating, which was true. Now, I'm not saying this as a confession. This is how the preacher felt about life. Think of how this game felt for my sister. It doesn't matter what card I play. Eric's going to win no matter what. That's how the preacher felt. It doesn't matter what I do, it'll end the same anyway. I'm sure we've had days like that, haven't we? I can't do anything right today. He says, this is life under the sun. It's fleeting. It's worthless. Try as you may, you won't get ahead. You won't make a difference. And when you're gone, no one remembers you, and the earth just keeps going on and on. And remember what led him to that conclusion? Death. Death. We will all die one day. And honestly, this isn't a comfortable topic. It's not a conversation that's socially acceptable. The only time we really talk about death is when someone we're close to dies or they get terminally ill. That's it. Our culture, our lives ignore death. And we should reckon with the reality that we're just imagining things if our understanding of our lives doesn't take into account our death. Remember last week I said David Gibson tells us to live backwards instead of forwards. Start with the one thing that is inevitable for every one of us, death. And factor that into every situation, every circumstance, every decision you make. If that doesn't inform how we live, we're just pretending death doesn't exist. Here's what Ecclesiastes can do for us, how it can help. The argument the preacher makes is that all the things in life we pursue, wisdom, pleasure, work, possessions, comfort, security, all of it, those are bubbles we use to insulate us from reality. The reality that we're trying to avoid and not think about and pretend that doesn't exist is that we will die one day. Every one of us at some point will cease to exist from this earth. We scurry about trying to erase the reality of death from our minds, busying ourselves to avoid facing it. Listen, this is how we can be helped. All those bubbles will burst one day. The question isn't if they will, it's when. The great philosopher Blaise Pascal spent a lot of time pondering this, and he came to this conclusion. It's pretty bleak. It might sting a bit. He said, the reality is we aren't God. We're not in control. We don't have the strength or power we wish we had. In the end, we cannot cure death. They have tried, right? We can't fix ours or anyone else's suffering or misery. Instead, he says, we just don't think about it. We pretend it doesn't exist. Okay, here's the stingy part. He said, what often scares us the most is silence. When we're alone with our thoughts, with nothing to distract us. He said it's in the silence, in the quiet reflection, that we just might ponder those big, scary issues like our death. And what do? We do almost anything we can to avoid ever being confronted with silence. He said, because what starts to form in the depths of our souls in silence is boredom, melancholy, sadness, sorrow, and despair. And we want nothing to do with any of those. So what do we do instead? We distract ourselves. We pretend. We look to amusement, entertainment, even things that we know are empty and don't really satisfy. Social media, right? Why do you think they keep making a phone with more and more battery life? Because we stare at them all day long. We need them just a few more minutes. So answer this question. Could you, if you were sitting alone in a room, could you put down your phone? Maybe you'd have to put it in the other room. Could you turn off the TV? Could you put away any other thing that would distract yourself? Could you just sit in silence with your thoughts? That might be a foreign idea. If you couldn't do that, why not? Because often we're too bored. Our brains have been rewired to always need something to focus on. Or is it because of what Pascal said? We're afraid of where our thoughts might go. We're afraid of sadness, sorrow, despair taking over. We're afraid of being confronted with our own mortality. The preacher thought long and hard about these things. He can lead the way for us and help us contemplate some of life's hard questions. Let's turn the corner. Let's inject some hope into this sermon. If you ever Bible out, look at the end of chapter 2. The preacher's words take a surprising and a sudden turn. Without warning, and in the midst of this anger and despair, he says the first truly positive thing that we've heard from him. Maybe this you could put on a coffee mug, right? Look at verse 24. Martin Luther called these verses remarkable. He said they explain everything before and after. He even went so far as to say these verses are the main point of Ecclesiastes, which should make us sit up and take notice. Okay, what does verse 24 say? There is nothing better for a person than that he should eat and drink and find enjoyment in his toil. This also I saw is from the hand of God. For apart from him, who can eat or who can have enjoyment? Apart from God, who can eat or have enjoyment? For to the one who pleases him, God has given wisdom and knowledge and joy. But to the sinner, he has given the business of gathering and collecting only to give to one who pleases God. This also is vanity and striving after. He's got to put that tagline in, right? Many scholars point out the redundancy of Ecclesiastes, how everything under the sun is fleeting, worthless, like a vapor. And chapter 2 seems to highlight something important. If this is all there is, meaning if death comes to every one of us, then the stark reality is nothing matters. Throw our hands in the air and scream out, what's the point? But then the preacher tells us something. He says we've only been looking at half the equation. We've only been looking at half the equation. In order to get a thorough understanding of life and purpose and meaning, we have to include God. We must. The other half of the equation is what happens above the sun, right? Here's the difference. Many people say, eat, drink, and be merry because that's all there is. And when we consider half the equation, I tend to agree. But the preacher says something. In verse 24, he's saying something different, more along the lines of eat, drink, and be merry because that's what God has given us. Because it's a gift from God. He's saying, don't find your ultimate enjoyment or pleasure in eating, drinking, or the pleasures of this world. Enjoy them because they're a gift. God gives them as a blessing to be enjoyed down here. But here's the danger. If we try and get our ultimate satisfaction in a new phone or a new house or a job or our children, we're just going to be miserable. We'll be like the preacher who says it's pointless. But if we get our ultimate satisfaction in God, then all these other things fall into the right order. we can simply enjoy them for what they are. Now listen, because what I'm about to say requires our thinking caps, but I think it's helpful to sort through and get settled. Back to the book I referenced at the start, The Progress Paradox, how life gets better and we feel worse. Here's what I think is the underlying reason we end up feeling worse even though our lives are improving. It's about whose goals we're pursuing. It's about whose goals we're pursuing. We tend to use technology, wisdom, ingenuity. We want to fashion the world in our image to achieve our goals. But honestly, think about it. We're just a vapor. We're a mist. Our goals are too small. Our goals are short-sighted. Of course we're going to end up unsatisfied because only we thought of them. They only enhance us, right? God has put eternity in our hearts. We're made in the image of God. So yes, we exist. We live in a world that is under the sun. But we were made for so much more. Listen to me. You were made for so much more. C.S. Lewis was right on the money. He said, if this life makes you weary, if you despair of the fleeting nature of it, it actually is a hint that there's something more out there. What did he say? If I find in myself a desire which no experience in this world can satisfy, the most probable explanation is that I was made for a different world. We were made for a different world. We are made for God's world. We're made for so much more than just living under the sun. The preacher reminds us God exists, that all good gifts come from his hand, and that our lives should be oriented around him and his goals. Here's how we need to reframe our thinking. Everything in creation is a tool for God to use to achieve his goals. God's ways are not our ways. God's thoughts are not our thoughts. God's goals are not our goals. This is important. God's goal, listen, is not to make each and every one of us as comfortable as possible. It's just not God's goal. God's goal is not to make us wealthy or even healthy. That's not his main concern. God doesn't have a goal to make sure everything in your life works out just the way you want it to work out. God's main aim in everything is that it would be for his glory, that he would be worshiped. He would be honored. He would be made much of. It said all of creation would do what it's intended to do, honor and praise and worship him. And how does God accomplish that goal? By forming and shaping us into the image of his son. God wants to make you look more and more like Jesus every day. And guess what God has at his disposal to do that? All of creation. To make that happen, he has every situation, every circumstance, every relationship in your life. He's got your job and your bank account and your car at his disposal to do what? To form and shape you into the image of Jesus Christ. You see, look at it this way. What if God's purpose for eating is that we would be grateful in receiving another day of nourishment from his hand? What if God's purpose for work was not to make us successful or secure, but simply to make us faithful and generous and to build character? What if God's purpose in us gaining wisdom and knowledge isn't so that we'd think higher of ourselves or despair, but that we would know more about him and his creation so our worship would increase? That is thinking from God's perspective, above the sun, right? The preacher teaches us this: death can wake us up. Yes, it's the end of our lives on earth, but death is the gateway into a new reality, a reality that is above the sun, that will go on forever and ever. I shared this at the end of last Sunday's sermon. I think it's important. God is making all things new. You have been made new. You were made for a new and better world. So have hope, right? Our challenge is to live in this world with our eyes set on the new world, to live for God's goals and not our own, and to accept the good things down here as gifts that are enjoyed from God's hand. Here's the warning and the application today from God's word. Do not live as though your greatest treasure is under the sun. Don't become too attached to anything down here. Now, first of all, what did we see? It won't satisfy. It can't possibly satisfy you. Second, you can't keep it when you die, right? There's only one thing that's certain for every one of us on earth. It's our death. So here's the lesson. Don't hold the things of the world too tightly. How did Jesus say it? Do not lay up for yourself treasures on earth, where moth and rust destroy. What does he say instead? Seek first his kingdom and his righteousness, and all these things will be given unto you. All the rest will fall into their rightful place. May God have grace for us to know that we're just passing through this world. And by God's grace, we've been made new for a new and better world. We talked last week about the newness of what Jesus has done. He said there's nothing new under the sun. What has been is what will be, right? There's a newness to what Jesus has done through communion. And so I'd ask our servers to come forward to serve. If you are trusting in Jesus Christ, we'd love for you to take a one cup that's got a little piece of bread in it, one cup that's got a little piece of juice in it, and then just hold on to it. We're going to celebrate these together.